Hi, I'm Bob Sloan. I used to be general counsel at Entergy, and I've been teaching at Tulane Law School for a while, last few years, in the energy and some international activities. But I'm here just to very briefly introduce our distinguished speakers. I thought, first of all, I was struck by the title of the topic, A Bridge to Nowhere. I thought it should be a bridge to somewhere, and I hope it's something we can discuss today with our very strong team that's going to be speaking about where we're going with natural gas and how. The first speaker is going to be Forrest Bradley Wright, who's here. He'll be up in just a second, and he's Senior Policy Advisor at the Alliance for Affordable Energy, which is a very well-known group dealing with these topics for many years. He lives in Louisiana but does work in Louisiana and elsewhere, and he's going to really focus, I think, pretty heavily on environmental aspects and issues and how regulatory norms might be tightened to better ensure gas can truly be a relatively short-term bridge. And if I'm off on that, you'll correct me. The second speaker is going to be, many of you know, is Professor Eric Smith, who's right here. And Professor Smith is a professor at the Freeman School of Business here at Tulane. I should mention Forrest is a graduate of Tulane, undergraduate and an MBA, right? Yeah. Professor Smith is an associate director of the Tulane Energy Institute, aside from being a professor at the business school in the energy field. And he is going to talk, well, he'll speak for himself, but he's going to talk about a lot of industry aspects of the development of the natural gas industry, how it works, pros and cons. I think both speakers will talk about pros and cons. We're going to try and keep their talks to 25 minutes or so each, so we can allow time for questions from all of you, as well as my co-moderator, Brian Broussard, who is a MBA law student getting a joint degree, and Brian is particularly interested in these issues, energy issues, but also natural gas. So Brian will undoubtedly be joining us in some of the questions. So with that, I'll get out of the way. And
all right. Well, nice to see you all, and it is a pleasure indeed to be back here again. I actually took pollution control law in this course. I'm not a lawyer, but I did take some law courses here. And I spend a lot of time with lawyers now in my role working on regulatory matters, on energy policy, and have come to appreciate this is a place, if you care about the environment, you will recognize that energy issues are very significant. And what can be accomplished, for better or worse, in the utility regulatory space is profound. So I have been pleased to work with the Alliance for Affordable Energy since just after Hurricane Katrina. We keep quite busy. But this subject is a very interesting one because it sets up a notion of where we're coming from, where we are, and where we're going to. The notion of a bridge. And I think that underlying this question is, what is that bridge? How long is that bridge supposed to serve us, and where will we be when we're on the other side? But perhaps also infused in this subject is the question of what are we doing to move past this strategy? If we're anticipating that this is a movement from a time when we were using more polluting energy resources in recognition that doing so was creating environmental consequences, risk, through climate change, that I think the focus of attention was heavily on coal, and natural gas was seen as the lesser of evils. This is a way for us to continue to utilize existing generating resources that we have around the country and to fuel our way past coal and then presumably on to renewable energy, that is clean and not emitting emissions that cause global warming and also reducing the energy that we use, the energy that we waste. So this bridge is it's a response to an addiction that as a society we have to fossil fuels. And it's recognized that this is tended to be essentially a temporary addiction, right? That we're not just going to kick it, but it's going to help us get somewhere. And so I just want to challenge you to think of this as the methadone of our addiction. Because I think that it's very important for us to recognize if we are where we need to be. And it's important for us to recognize what choices we have, what options we have to be where we need to be today. So I'm going to focus today, starting with just a little quick breakdown of where we are. This is from 2016, but I think you'll get the idea. This is our legacy. This is what we work with now. Natural gas making up a little over a third. Coal has declined some in recent years, 30%. Nuclear is 20%, and renewables at 15%. Hydro, you see, is still a significant component of that. And what I'll talk about next are the market trends that are happening in the renewable energy sector, because in order to talk about this as a bridge, I think it's particularly important for us to recognize what will get us past that. How do we tell if we're making progress? And what's happening in renewable energy is some of the most compelling. So over these last few years, we have seen a remarkable advancement for wind and solar as a percentage of new capacity additions in this country. And you'll look at the most recent year here is 2016. That solar on the bottom there, 39%, the largest source of new capacity additions in the country, followed by natural gas at 29%, and in 2016, 26% by wind. So wind and solar combined, vastly exceeding the new generation resources from fossil fuels. You can look back a couple of years. You'll see in 2014, wind was dominant. 2013, wind was dominant. There have been remarkable growth in this area. And I thought it would be helpful to see it just breaking out solar from those. And the pace of growth is telling. And in fact, from 2015 to 2016, you see that it essentially doubled. It fell off by about a couple of gigawatts this last year, but it's still showing this dramatic trend line. And of course, the reason for that is price. The cost of solar power has been falling precipitously. It's actually been about 86% in the last 10 years. And this is a bit of a detailed graphic. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but I just want to kind of draw your attention to, again, this is the levelized cost of energy. That means for every kilowatt hour, that's what we tend to consume at our home. You see the price of that falling and falling from 2009 to 2017, 86% for solar, 67% for wind. And it's also helpful to kind of see it side by side now, because even just a very few years ago, in integrated resource planning proceedings here in New Orleans and across the state of Louisiana, this is where the utility engages in a planning process, looks at the projected demand for the next 20 years, looks at the existing resources, considers what resource additions would meet our needs going forward, and has them compete, supposedly on a level playing field. But what you'll see here is that wind and solar are both competitive with and indeed less expensive than energy from even combined cycle gas, which is the more efficient form of gas generation. And I guess I also want to just back up and note that these price ranges here, you'll see the very first word on this slide. That's unsubsidized. These are the unsubsidized levelized cost of energy. Now, there are subsidies, significant subsidies, for solar and wind that have been driving the economics. It has been very much supporting economies of scale, so a ramping up of the manufacturing, the installation, driving down the costs. It's been perpetuating. It's expected that those subsidies will not always be in place. It's important to see where we already are with price points. And I remember just a very few years ago, the integrated resource planning process underway. Of course, we have been polling for, hoping for, cheering for renewable energy for years now. And on straight economics, even just a very few years ago, it wasn't there. It is there today. It is there today. And we'll get in a minute to sort of what are some of the factors that are both propelling and some of the factors that are slowing renewable energy's adoption. But all of those are important. And I kind of want to put this in context, actually before we get to that one, I want to put this in context with just a few examples in the region here. You've got the Southeast generally not the leading edge when it comes to things like clean energy and those types of investments. You have a 2,000 megawatt wind project. It's the largest single facility for wind that has been proposed by AEP, SWEPCO, in the northwest state portion of the state of Louisiana. They're taking about 1,200 megawatts. They are also committing to solar energy. You've got some movement in the energy territories with an 81 megawatt solar project in Arkansas, a few more on the trivial side projects elsewhere in their territory so far. You've got Georgia, just the powerhouse for utility scale renewable energy in the Southeast, with about 2,000 megawatts of built and planned projects. And then you've got Florida Power and Light, the Sunshine State, which has not historically been particularly supportive of solar energy, now seeing a project by Florida Power and Light that is being described as the gas peaking plant killer. It's a combination of solar and batteries that is able to drive down both costs and provide performance that previously would served principally by the technology of gas peaking plants. So what's happening on the other side of that equation, right? Those are the trends, sort of the line of advance on renewable energy. You've got, of course, an existing fleet of gas power plants across the country. You have decisions being made as recently as yesterday in the city of New Orleans about whether to continue to build these kinds of gas plants, and then you have these new economics. Renewable energy, I think we should really recognize, as I've been discussing it to this point, and as it relates to cost, have been showing superior competitive performance on energy. So that's, again, the kilowatt hours, sort of the volumetric flow of energy. We know that they are intermittent resources. So there are different functional capabilities to do with resources that I think fit very much into this question about natural gas as a bridge and sort of where do these pieces fit together. But you now also have, as I noted, the advancements in storage technology, and most commonly the lithium-ion batteries, and the price points for those have been falling at a pace that is being kind of equivalence drawn to what has happened with solar. So it's an earlier stage, but you're seeing these economies of scale driving down those prices, and you see gas projects being offset with a combination of demand-side management, renewable energy, and battery storage with Alyssa Canyon in California. The result of a massive methane leak that occurred created concerns about stability of the natural gas marketplace there. Also in California, the Puentes gas-fired project was put on hold, and the California Public Utilities Commission required that be reopened. Other projects were bid in that provided an alternative mix of clean energy resources. You've got the speed by which these kinds of battery storage projects can be deployed with Australia recently on a challenge, I guess, Tesla got into through a tweet of 100 megawatts of battery in 100 days, and I think they beat that handily in terms of the time frame, providing instantaneous power, something that natural gas, even the more advanced forms of supposedly fast-starting gas generation to start up that power, still is in the order of minutes, and with storage it's in the matter of seconds. So there's a lot going on there. FERC has made a very major decision recently that the broader array of attributes associated with storage need to be factored into market prices in the regional market, and that is seen as another factor to really alter the overall balance of resources that we turn to. And I guess the last piece on this part that I would point to, and I'm not necessarily presenting it in a market trends perspective, but it's the question of how much energy that we're using today are we just wasting? Energy that we could achieve the same objectives with efficiency. The American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy out of Washington, D.C., it's the go-to organization across the country, has looked forward, projecting over the next 20 years that we could cut our energy waste by 20%. 20% of all the energy that we use could be eliminated through cost-effective investments in demand-side management. So we have significant inertia. And I mentioned integrated resource planning as a process by which we look at our needs and we consider the various resources that could be available to meet those needs. They're supposed to compete on a level playing field and ultimately provide us with a way to make sound decisions about these very frequently very large and expensive investment decisions. Utilities drive this process. There are a number of components that explain that. These are very technical processes. They involve complicated software that, generally speaking, only the utility has. Only the utility then has access to. They're generally in the position of generating all of the inputs that go in. Perhaps they respond to advice from other parties about things that would be considered and put into the models. Often they don't. And these are regulated monopolies. They're monopolies, meaning that they do not have competition in the marketplace, so this planning process is extremely important. But they're regulated, which is supposed to be a protection for the public, that the decisions are being made in the public's interest. But we do have a dynamic of regulatory agency capture. So for those of you who have studied environmental law, this is an important issue that you should be very aware of, where the utilities have a tremendous amount of influence over the regulators that are there supposedly to oversee them. This kind of modeling is generally done for capacity. So they're looking at essentially what is the maximum amount of energy that might ever be needed at a given time, and building up a resource stack to meet that. That is a different strategy than optimizing for energy. So if you have an intermittent resource and it's significantly less expensive than your traditional fossil fuel resources, those may lose out nonetheless because they're not being deployed for building up that capacity stack. You have utilities like SWEPCO that have taken a different approach. And I know there are a lot of things going on this, but really you'll see sort of near year 2015, further year out 2024, and I realize they actually went another 20 years that would have made this even more dramatic. But you'll see on the left is capacity, and a big movement with coal and natural gas going downward, and then the green and the purple there with wind and solar increasing. In their integrated resource plan, virtually all of the resource additions that they planned in 2015 were renewables. There was essentially a trivial amount of natural gas, and it clearly showed that they were optimizing for energy. So if you look on the right side, you can see, look at the blue. You can see this massive amount of the energy that has been supplying their customers from coal being reduced substantially down, natural gas taking a bigger role, but renewable energy being at a level that it certainly never has in the past. Entergy, on the other hand, included no renewable energy whatsoever in their resource planning forecast in the 2015 IRP cycle. There were major questions raised about the inputs they were using, the market assumptions, and ultimately it demonstrated that they do not have at least a visible, coherent strategy for integrating renewable energy and optimizing the energy price advantages that renewables provide. Theirs is more of a traditional, especially natural gas and nuclear-focused fleet, and renewables ends up taking the form essentially of that kind of nice thing you would do if you can at the end. And what we've seen to date is them issuing 200 megawatt renewable energy requests for proposals, getting lots and lots of bids in, a lot of work goes into it, nothing comes out of it. We've seen no projects come through that at the state level. In New Orleans, I won't take up much time on it, but there's a commitment to 100 megawatts of renewables. That was back in July of 2016. The RFP went out. So we're coming up on a couple of years. The only thing that's come in is a 5 megawatt application for distributed rooftop solar in New Orleans. It has some economic problems, and less expensive renewable resources have not been presented yet. So it's a believe it when I see it type issue there. As far as environmental impacts and attributes go, it's important that we recognize that natural gas was presented as an alternative to coal because of carbon emissions. But ultimately, the reason that was raised as a concern was because of contributions to climate change. And natural gas does emit carbon, and just as importantly, methane, which is natural gas, is itself a greenhouse gas and a contributor to climate change. And it must be understood. It must be looked at in a full life cycle manner. It's not just what comes out of the pipe at the plant. It's everything that goes all the way up to the extraction in the first place, the transportation of that, and it's known that there are significant leaks that are generally highly underreported. That from power plants, there's evidence that there's 21 to 120 times what is reported being actually emitted, and from refineries, that number is 11 to 90 times. Water contamination is an issue when you consider fracking particularly, and its pervasiveness as a means of reaching these resources, even earthquakes. And I think Oklahoma, it comes up in the news from time to time because of earthquakes that are very clearly attributed to the extraction industries there. I'm going to keep moving because I know I don't have very much time. I'll just touch on a couple more things to do with natural gas trends and just point out that this is a resource that has been historically, and I'm going to draw a contrast in a second, but it's been historically highly volatile. These are the Henry Hub prices for our region for natural gas. You can see they're particularly high after Hurricane Katrina. For those of you who are here, you may remember the very severe energy bills we have, but you can see it drops off quite a lot from there, and that's the impact of horizontal drilling with fracking, and it nevertheless does still go up and down. This is seasonal over the last few years. You can see the blue line, the clearest line is recent, and that little uptick. You remember the cold weather that we had in January. We might see that pressure there. So I guess I want to just point out that we've had fracking really change the price economics on natural gas. Renewable energy is still beating natural gas on cost of energy generation. But natural gas is expected to continue to stay low, and then there's export. Export is expected to be an economic opportunity for the state and for that industry, but it also has an effect on supply and demand. So we would anticipate that there is still price volatility in our future. Just because we have new technology as it relates to extraction does not mean that this is a static resource. It's certainly not. That there are expectations of between 1.1% and 7.2% effect of exports on prices related to natural gas. I won't go into any detail on it, but I will just draw the distinction. When people talk about low-cost natural gas, they are talking about combined cycle gas turbines. These are larger facilities that are more efficient than the gas peaking power plants, which, for instance, were subject of decision yesterday at the New Orleans City Council. Those are comparatively more expensive. The levelized cost of energy from those units, they are not run as often. While they tend to be run less often, that does not mean that they do not still have significant emissions effects and environmental effects. And it all comes back to this question, the question of time. If this is a bridge, how long are we going to be on this bridge? We have a legacy fleet of gas facilities across the country that are providing us with a great deal of power on which we depend. They also are providing us with the means of balancing and supporting the increase of renewable energy and the intermittency associated with that power generation. But if we are to make decisions today about how we will meet our energy needs, we have to recognize that a gas generating facility is expected to have a 30 to 50-year lifespan. At a time when we are being told we have to get our emissions under control today, what kind of a bridge is it to obligate ourselves to certainly the cost and the use of these resources that many decades in the future? Demand-side management, energy efficiency, renewable energy, these are far more modular. They're more flexible. You can add them as you need them along the way. They are not as lumpy and singularly expensive. So let's say that we were to be able to meet our energy needs increasingly and don't need those gas plants anymore. I mean, that's a good thing, right? I think it is. But if you've just approved a power plant that you are obligated to pay for the next 30 years, if you stop needing it, stop using it in 10 or 15 years, you still have to pay for it. It's called a stranded asset. We had an example very recently where we'll be moving to advanced metering infrastructure, smart meters in New Orleans. It's an investment of about $70 million. But there's another over $30 million of cost obligation to the old meters that we hadn't paid off. So if we are not making sound decisions with the resources we invest in today, thinking we'll just buy better resources later, we're forgetting the fact we still have to pay for those choices that we made in the past. And the last thing I will say is that we have the conversation forever about economics. Can we fuel the growth of this country? Can we power our economy with renewable energy, clean energy? Absolutely. In fact, not only that, but we have slowed, leveled, and they're beginning to bring down the amount of energy that we need for the same economic productive output in this country. We're being more productive with each kilowatt hour that we use. And today, or I guess my most recent figures are 2016, the solar industry employed more than twice as many Americans as the coal industry, and the same amount as the natural gas industry. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics projects solar and wind as the number 1 and number 2 areas for job growth over the next decade. Fossil fuels are not on that list. So thank you all very, very much. I appreciate your time. Welcome your questions. Thank you.
So Professor Smith is going to
Right.
give us...
Disagree with Forrest.
Huh?
Say I'm going to disagree with Forrest.
Not disagree, you're going to...
What was our comment this morning that they were talking about? We're going to reflect upon and
Reflect upon.
come back on
Yeah.
in terms of what the art of the possible is.
And then we'll have time for some questions. I'm sure there'll be a lot of...
So I'm going to go very quickly. Any of these slides are available to anybody who wants them. As I said, I'm with the Energy Institute. I focus on all sorts of energy, including renewable energy. My background is primarily in fossil fuels, so I will take some of that with a grain of salt. So my bridge to nowhere has a question mark, which means I don't really believe it's a bridge to nowhere, and you'll see the reasons why in a minute. Fundamentally, the global economy is growing at about a 3.4% rate. That doesn't sound like very much, but it's expanding from 7.4 billion people today to something like 9 billion people in 2040. To put that in context, that's like adding a city the size of Shanghai every 4 months. Not a small place, certainly bigger than New Orleans. Those are the two key macroeconomic effects that are going on. We are simply bringing more and more people onto this earth as developing economies create the sustainable earnings for these people to increase in size. The biggest single contribution to that growth is India. India is about 1 billion people. Compare that to us, and something over 300 million. But it grows almost 30%, and even growing 30%, it's still that represents about 30% comes from India. It's growing at 11%, but bear in mind that 18% is their share of anticipated population growth. So if you want to do a derivative study here, you would say that you've got some additional growing room for India. The other big player is Southeast Asia, and I'm not even including China in that. But if all that Southeast Asia does is match China, you'll see some fairly amazing growth. The rest of the growth is coming from the Middle East, from Africa, and Latin America. Put it in graphic terms, you can see the U.S., Europe, and Japan. You know, basically your developed countries are either flat or declining slightly in terms of consumption of primary energy. But look where the growth is. India's over there, the big circle. China's next. But then you see the Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Central America. If you put it on a typical histogram, you'll see that the U.S. and Canada are still by far the largest consumers of natural gas. Russia's in there, as is the European Union, China, Iran, and Japan. But in fact, they're all growing and moving to the right. If you want to talk about new developments elsewhere in the world, one of the more intriguing ones for us over at the business school is this Eastern Mediterranean region. You see the Zohr field. Let's see if I can get this arrow to work. Zohr is right here. That's Egyptian. That field has been brought on stream, and it will eventually be not only allow Egypt to be self-sufficient again, but it will provide gas to support their idle LNG facilities, increase the LNG supply for transmission to the rest of the world. Cyprus has Aphrodite. Lots of arguments, as you might guess, between the Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots and the Turks and the Turkish-aligned portions of Cyprus about who that field actually belongs to, including the Turkish Navy blockading an international drill ship from drilling on that property just in the last couple of weeks. The big play in the area is this thing called Leviathan. You see right here. Leviathan's big enough, and it's in Israeli waters, as you can see most of these fields are. That is providing a great opportunity, if they can work out the geopolitics, to support all of these Eastern Mediterranean states. It's already helping to support Jordan, but they'd like to use it to support Turkey and some of the other countries in the area. One of my colleagues in the engineering school is up at the IPEC conference in Washington right now, which is the sort of the American Jewish movement to try and produce more amity in the area, if you will, by education and joint programs that we can work on together. So let's talk about U.S. natural gas. This is just a workover rig. You can see the pipe racks and the top drive there. This is where the wells are in the United States. These are the active wells. There's something like 900,000 of them around, oil and gas together. And more than 130,000 have been drilled since 2010. If you look at our total fossil fuel production, you'll see coal is still a significant portion, but declining. Natural gas is expanding. Crude oil is expanding. In both cases, largely because of fracking. We aren't drilling many vertical conventional wells anymore. And then the very top, hydrocarbon gas liquids, people tend to forget about. These are the heavier hydrocarbons that come up in gas wells or in associated gas that comes up through oil wells. These are the ethane, propane, butane, and pentanes plus. And we tend to forget about them, except they're 3 million barrels a day. So they are roughly twice the output of some of the countries in Africa on a countrywide basis. Moreover, they're more valuable than the natural gas, and they tend to be the starting products of plastics. They go to olefins plants, and then the olefins get converted into polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, and some of the other plastic materials. That's the cheapest plastic source in the world. So, not surprisingly, we have saturated our own steam cracking facilities using this material coming up from the gas fields, and we're starting to export material. In fact, just with propane, we've gone from being a net importer in like 2008 to being the world's largest exporter of propane. Again, a result of the fracking revolution. Here's where the reserves are. Not any big surprises there. You notice the biggest circle on the map is over the Utica and Marcellus shales in the northeast, but Texas has its own share of bubbles for gas fields as well. And then Colorado, Wyoming also are strong producers. This is what the growth looks like. You can see the various names there, but you notice here in Louisiana and Texas, we have the Haynesville Shale. It's largely dry gas, which means it doesn't have the gas liquids. Its major attribute is that it's close to power plants and it's close to the big export terminal that Cheniere has down on the Texas-Louisiana border. Another one of the charts, somewhat similar to what Forrest showed, you see coal leveling off, you see natural gas increasing, these petroleum liquids staying constant. Other renewable energy has a fairly steep growth rate. Nuclear is flat, hydro is flat, and liquid biofuels is pretty flat. So we have a rising dependence, if you will, on natural gas, largely because of the economics that Forrest referred to. One of the bad things about not bad, but one of the characteristics of natural gas production in the U.S. is it's virtually all from fracking at this point. And fracked wells are not the same as conventional reservoirs. Fracked wells, you're creating the reservoir, and it's got about a 3-year life before 85% of the gas has been exhausted. So you have to drill a lot. It's drilling intensive. That's good if you're in the job of measuring highly paid blue-collar labor. It's not so good if you're concerned about wear and tear on your equipment. This is a Rystad chart. Rystad's a Norwegian group. And what they're looking at here is the resources in terms of trillions of cubic feet across the abscissa. And then when you look at the ordinate, you're looking at break-even gas prices. So like most commodities, you have marginal pricing. You start out producing the cheapest thing you have until you run out of it. Then you produce the next cheapest thing, then the third cheapest thing, and so on. And when you get to the point where you have satisfied demand, whatever that price is for that more expensive material is applied to all of the products that are below the curve. And you can see here at $3, which is a marker price right now, I suppose, for gas, virtually all of our supplies are at least in the running. The range in color is a 75% confidence interval on the estimate. So the dots are sort of the median average kind of price for that particular resource location. So gas is going up. That's the yellow line here, and you can see that oil is going up as well. Both results primarily of fracking type efforts. Here's the natural gas potential. It's all up and to the right. There are a couple of places that are flat, including the Rockies and the mid-continent areas, but you see Appalachia, where the Marcellus and the Utica Shale are located, is doing just fine. And the Texas Gulf Coast, as well as the overall Gulf Coast, are continuing to grow. So yes, we're going to be producing more gas going forward. It happens to be a very cost-effective solution. And as Forrest referred to, it's also imminently dispatchable, which is to say I can turn it on when the power is needed. It does take some time to start the plants up, but nowhere near the amount of time that was taken by the older steam cycle or Rankine cycle type plants like the ex-Michoud plant. All of this requires gas to be able to be moved around, and you can see that the gas, and particularly the gas liquids, are moving to the south where the crackers and the installed infrastructure is. Louisiana as a state, we tend to think of ourselves as an energy production state. In reality, we're an energy consumption state. We have more jobs and highly paid jobs in our refineries and our petrochemical plants than we do in our upstream drilling for oil and gas in state waters and across the state itself. So we forecast additional natural gas consumption both for the Gulf Coast as well as for the rest of the U.S. So, is this a bridge to nowhere? I don't think so. I think what this is an ability to produce cost-effective power and power that can be used to support additional renewables when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining. Just to show you the impact of fracking, the dark color here on the left is the production from, this is actually drilling footage, but for frac wells, horizontal wells, and then the paler color is everything else in the sort of conventional case. When you look on the right, you see the growth in footage, and you see the two sort of cross back in 2012. And now our conventional wells, vertical wells, are sort of dropping off the map, and the horizontal wells have sort of taken over. Forrest put up some charts talking about costs and what's going on with the renewable side. This is the equivalent for our cost and efficiency improvements in Southwest Pennsylvania, not a low-cost state. But you can see it's primarily shale gas. You've seen a 114% increase in the length of the lateral, which means we're exposing more of the shale to production. You see a 57% decrease in the cost of the wells, and you see the cost to lateral length, which includes a few vertical wells, big time decrease, and the completion cost, which is the wells we have at when we drill a well, we call it a DUC, drilled and uncompleted. We have an inventory of DUCs, and when we need gas in a hurry, we can go in and frack that well and put it online. That's one of the reasons people tend to brag about the U.S. becoming a swing producer. I would argue that we aren't a swing producer because we don't have collusion in terms of supply decision making. We used to. Both the U.S. government and the Texas government had recognized cartels up until 1960. What we have now is a very responsive system that can produce gas in a hurry and oil if the price is justified. So here's where the gas is going. You see electric demand is a significant portion, but it is about equal to industrial demand and even to our exports to Mexico. We don't tend to think of Mexico as being a very big deal, but they are huge consumers of U.S. gas, virtually, well, the bulk of it through pipelines, but then also some LNG. They have 3 LNG receiving locations. Here's the anticipated growth in exports. You see LNG and Mexico are the 2 big players, but look what happens post-2021, 5 years from now. Both Mexico is more than doubled, and LNG is probably quintupled. What is the effect on the world price for gas? You see the marks for March 2014, something like $20 an MCF, dropping down to something like $5 or $6 an MCF. The fact that the lower cost LNG based on lower cost gas in the U.S. is now in the world market is forcing the other producers who are much larger to come down and meet some of our price points. Offshore prospects. The offshore in the Gulf of Mexico is largely becoming an oil province. The gas that was produced conventionally in the shallow waters of the Gulf has sort of dried up. It can't compete with the shale gas. The deep water, these are 2 of Shell's big facilities and operating in the same field, are producing oil and associated gas. By law, we have to monetize the gas if we're going to monetize the oil. We don't get to flare except for special occasions. So what's happening is we still produce gas in the Gulf, but it's a byproduct of oil production. This is graphically the same thing. You see the steep drop-off in terms of gas from gas wells versus the steady outsupply of gas from oil wells. So shelf production, they both are going down to the right. Deep water, they're both going up and to the right. And this is just some details on the fields out in the Gulf. You'll read these colorful names. These are the blocks that the government has called, these are large blocks made up of individual blocks which are leased. An individual block is typically 3 miles square. Same thing for deep water gas production following the oil model. And then capital spending. We tend to neglect this, but you can see here that we have an enormous amount of spending going on. If you look at just 2016, you're seeing numbers on the order of $47 billion being spent. All of that requires labor to install, skilled labor. Probably 50% of it is coming from out of state because of shortages here in Louisiana. And that's not going away anytime soon. Texas is also in the game, but when we start talking about how the plants are built or what they're being used for, you see LNG export is the major consumer of capital, followed by methanol, ammonia, and the cracker polymer area. Methanol and ammonia are both surrogates for shipping gas. They're both produced from methane. And to the degree that we have foreign investment, it's into getting a stable product that can be shipped as cheaply as possible. You can do that with LNG. You can also do it on a smaller scale with methanol and ammonia. Methanol tends to go into plastics as well as into fuel enhancement. It's actually a better fuel enhancement than ethanol is. And ammonia goes into fertilizer. The crackers here are referring to steam crackers for processing propane and butane. So that's just a pie chart showing the same information. You can see the bulk of the capital is going into LNG exports. You can see here supporting activities. We're getting a little labor discussion here. For Texas, you can see that oil and gas extraction has stayed relatively stable even during the downturn in 15 and 16. But the support activities, the Halliburtons and Schlumbergers, the drilling contractors, all of those people took a serious hit in terms of census. If you look at the individual states here, we've got Texas and Louisiana we can combine. Louisiana, when we talk about our workforce, we're talking about roughly 2% each in the upstream and in the refining and downstream chemical manufacturing. If we talk about employment in the U.S., it's about 8% of U.S. upstream employment and about 4% of refining and chemicals. Incidentally, those jobs tend to pay 100% more than comparable jobs in other industries. We talk about Texas and the Gulf Coast total. You see Texas is about the same in terms of percent of state employment for upstream and actually less in terms of the refinery side. But look at the percentage of employment in the U.S. 47% of the upstream employees in the country are located in Texas. Here in Louisiana, it's more like, as I said, closer to 8%. Refining and chemical manufacturing are about 4% for Louisiana and about 11% for Texas. So we are an energy region, but we are primarily focused very specifically in terms of geography. We produce oil in the Gulf, we produce oil and gas in Texas, and in Louisiana we process both. Here's the same thing on GDP, no surprises there. You can see that about 18.4% of Texas GDP is associated with the refining downstream, and 57% is involved with the upstream. For our state, it's 7.7% and 4.6%. So what happened during the recent recession? You can see a steep drop-off from about 50,000 jobs down to 34 or so for upstream, and the same sort of increase going on now as we come out of that recession. But look at the refining and downstream. We didn't slow up. We actually increased through the recession. Not a bad outcome. I'm going to skip the LNG here except to point out that we've got LNG supply from a number of sources, including the U.S., and then you see the consumers are overwhelmingly Asia and Europe, which is why the Panama Canal is kind of important. What's happened to us as a country, we have one remaining import terminal that stays busy in Everett, Massachusetts. It's suburban Boston. And then look at the exports with just one operating terminal. What's going on? About 2 billion cubic feet a day. So it's changing the world market, and you can see the effects as we go down the list here. I'm going to skip I'll go through quickly. there are upstream issues. There are pros and cons. There's the threats of fracking moratoria. You don't get the goose. You kill the goose that lays the golden egg if you go after fracking. The impact of shale oil production on associated gas production. They're tied together. Methane emissions, Forrest mentioned that. Flaring, we don't flare as much as we used to, but in these underdeveloped states like North Dakota, we have laws in place to phase down the flaring of natural gas as we build new pipelines. Canadian tar sands, crude production. Big, bad, evil thing, except Louisiana would be much better off going forward if we had access, unimpeded access to that crude. Those of you who favor Keystone XL pipeline, I know will be in the minority, but Keystone XL is sort of the lifeblood going forward. And the Capline reversal, another big pipeline of getting heavy crude oil to the refineries that really can't run without it here along the Gulf Coast. Taxes, zoning activism, swing production, as I said. We're not a true swing producer, but we are a very responsive producer of natural gas. Midstream and downstream, environmental movement has made a point of going after the pipelines and supply routes for these hydrocarbons. I understand their logic. I can't agree with it, but I do think that it represents a legal challenge, if you will, to this continued prosperity associated with producing hydrocarbons. So is it a bridge too far? That's another title. This is the Mackinac Strait Bridge. I show it because there's an earlier Mackinac Strait Bridge that flew apart because of some design problems. This one was built and it's still functioning just fine. So I got to talk a little bit about the power plant. This is information taken from the Alliance's various publications. All of their issues with the plant in East New Orleans and at the former Michoud site. Here's my reality check. First of all, we persist in trying to manage power consumption in New Orleans outside of the jurisdiction of the Louisiana Public Service Commission. The commission does not control power production in the city of New Orleans. The city council does. Hence the hearings that Forrest mentioned. If you want to save money quickly, you can save roughly $20 million by getting rid of the independent regulatory capabilities of the city council. They spend about $10 million. Entergy spends at least that much trying to respond to their needs. That's not likely to be very politically correct, but that's the quickest significant money that you can save if you want to go after savings for ratepayers. Entergy shut down conventional gas plants, meaning steam cycle, Rankine cycle type plants, at 9 Mile Point, at Michoud, and at Patterson, the site of the proposed new plant. They have built one plant in the area, a 600 megawatt combined cycle plant at 9 Mile Point, easily the most efficient gas plant in the state. They're building a second near Destrehan and a third over in southwest Louisiana near Lake Charles. They're also building one in Texas for whatever it's worth at Conroe. CCGTs are kind of an answer to a maiden's prayer. They are clean, relatively clean as a fossil plant. They are responsive, and they are relatively inexpensive to build. I say relatively because we're talking about, numbers approaching $1 billion a pop, but the fact of the matter is for that you get amounts of electricity approaching 1,000 megawatts a pop, and that's typically with the capacity of a nuclear power plant. They're far cheaper than those. The proposed plant for the Michoud site is designed to do several different things. Among that is to mitigate outages. The Alliance has made a big deal out of the fact that there are problems with outages in New Orleans. If you look outside the window, you see one of the reasons why we have a lot of trees. Nobody's suggesting we cut down the trees, but the trees falling on power lines are a major cause of outages. And I think Forrest would agree with me, we don't have a shortage in gross terms of power generation capacity in the state. What we have is a shortage of highly responsive generation capacity. So this 100 megawatts is not a big power plant. The Alliance has made a big deal about water consumption. This plant will consume something like 350 gallons a day. Of that, the usage by the turbine, the reciprocating engines themselves is about 3 gallons apiece a day. So there are probably houses and there are certainly hotels and things in New Orleans that consume more water than the energy the proposed facility would consume. It also provides the ability for quick restarts after hurricanes and things of that sort. It helps tremendously when you're trying to moderate the intermittent output of renewables, so it's basically an ideal facility to support renewables. And you can use it to control voltage and other things as well. We're finished. Okay. I will start, and this will be in my charts, but just some of the additional issues that we've started talking about in terms of the plant. For the record, I'm talking about my opinions, not Telane's opinions, and I think that what you ought to figure on is getting a better understanding of what the art of the possible is, and reflect a little bit on the difference between pure ideals and what's practically achievable. That's my last word.
Thank both of y'all for speaking. If y'all want to stand up here, swing your chairs around just for the question and answer, we can stay a little casual with it. But the first question I had, I'm glad you brought it up at the end of your presentation for us, was about the volatility. Now, right now, things are looking pretty good as far as prices of natural gas go, but historically, there has been a lot of volatility. And as we increase the percentage of our electricity that's generated by natural gas nationally, and we can trust utilities to hedge against spot prices in the short term, but over the long term, you're getting to the point where you might be indexing the cost of electricity to natural gas. So I was wondering if there's the industry is concerned about things like that, or if there's any strategies for dealing with that.
You want to go first? Basically, the point of the matter is the history is interesting, but remember the history is based on conventional production techniques. All of the new production is based on fracking, and our history of fracking in volume goes back to about 2008. We have consistently produced lower cost gas as a result, and because we have gone after the wet gas, the gas liquids have acted as a natural arbitrage. We sell them for more than the gas is worth. If we can't, we just leave them in the gas stream, and we use them for pipeline gas. But if we can sell them for plastics and value added and exports, we strip them out, and they're handled by a separate distribution chain. So my theory is, as long as we can access fracked gas in the U.S., and ultimately the rest of the world will catch up, but right now it's us and Canada primarily. As long as we can do that, we can count on a fairly responsive supply of low-cost methane.
I think I would just add to that, there has been a rush towards natural gas. Part of it is the decline of coal, obviously, and certainly it's driven by the prices. But when you have that greater degree of reliance, and you may have weather events that put greater pressure on the available resources in a given moment, you do see prices increase. And so the more there is continued reliance, expansion of natural gas generation, then the more susceptible we will all be to that. I would note there obviously has also been a rush to renewable energy resources. So I'm not trying to paint that as something that's a bad thing in the general notion, but you simply don't have the volatility. You don't have a fuel input related to the installation of those resources. And I would leave this particular important consideration, which is that even to the extent that responsive acceleration of gas extraction is possible to manage cost, it puts us in a position of concurrently expanding the environmental effect, right? So the more that we have a reliance on the fuel resource is a commitment to the environmental consequences that go along with that, which again goes beyond the greenhouse gas emissions, although that is an incredibly important part.
Well, I had a couple, do you have a question?
Yeah, so Professor Smith, I didn't see anything other than in your presentation, other than there's a lot of gas and we can create a lot of profits for a bunch of concentrated fossil fuel industries going on. Do you agree then, because I didn't see any comparison in your presentation at all, between the cost projections for renewable versus the cost projections for fossil fuels? So since it wasn't in your presentation, do you agree with the Alliance's presentation that renewable costs are going to be falling and that renewables are actually competitive on a 30-year cycle, more competitive than fossils? Or is there some other information you can put out there?
Well, I think that's a good question. I'm not going to question Forrest's forecast. They were Lazard, I believe, that provided those numbers. The big difference between the two sources is if I were doing a forecast of renewables, I would put in 100% backup by natural gas because you cannot predict when the wind's going to blow and when the sun's going to shine. We have terrible wind conditions around us until you get 50 miles out in the Gulf. So we rely more on solar if we're going to do any sort of renewables. The solar is going to be available, what do you figure, 25% of the time?
It's more than that now.
But it's a...
It's given a 50% capacity credit in the MISO regional market.
Okay. Well, I'd even say 50%. That means 50% of the time it's not there. So the risk I would propose is that if I have to include 100% of the capacity backup for 50% of the capacity that's installed per Forrest's numbers, it's going to run my cost of renewables up pretty significantly. And I think they would, doing it on that basis, you would see them actually be higher than natural gas costs today. And in
And I would add to that, this is a really important thing. You do not need 100% match of fossil fuel generation behind renewable energy. And it just occurs to me as I kind of think about this, all of our food comes ultimately from growing. And if you felt that you couldn't plant a garden because there might be a cloud on a given day, where would you be? The fact of the matter is that you spread out your generating resources with a robust transmission system so that to the extent that there is a cloud over New Orleans at a given time, that's not stopping where the wind isn't blowing, on one particular spot. You have the generation across the network that you built around that. But I guess I would also bring it back to, I think the root of this presentation's the question underlying, which is that if we have a policy objective and we recognize its importance for environment as a subject of its own, but society as a broader subject, then you need to look at what does it take in order to succeed on that objective. And I would put this particularly challenging issue forward. You have a point now where the cost is competitive, but the policy is actually a drag on our investment in renewable energy in some capacity. Now, I would say subsidies would be the other direction, right? That provides acceleration. But you have a drag on policy that comes from a highly conservative regulatory utility construct that we operate in. And I guess I would just remind those who, older than myself actually, with Ma Bell and landline telecommunications and what this has meant for society, for information, for communications, for everything, the amazingly profound dynamism that has come from us cutting that cord at one point. And I think that we have the potential for at least as much acceleration in the utilities space as we've seen in telecommunications, but regulatory capture has been an enormous drag on catching that innovation potential. And I do still fully expect to see that where we are 5 years from now, 10 years from now, is beyond what we can imagine today. just as it was 5 years ago and 10 years ago, where we've got to with telecommunications.
I would just rebut one brief comment here. The utility contract that is made with society is when you turn the switch on, there will be power there. That's at the core of every public utility commission in the country. If I were to substitute all renewables for all fossil fuels at some point in the future, I've broken that contract because I cannot guarantee that the power will be there. And yes, it's true that there are other parts of the country that might not be, in the shade. At night, they're all in the shade, but taking that away, the point is that you don't build huge transmission systems without a lot of public protest, and more importantly, you don't build them to use them only during periods when the sun isn't shining. There's just not enough utilization to justify it.
Well, yeah. There's a lot of, I'm going to make one recommendation to the sponsors. The next time there'll be twice as much time.
I
So
will
what
say
might-
that lunch officially starts around 12:30, but there's no panels going on during lunch, so if you want to stay in here,
Okay.
you want to attend lunch.
Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
I think if we killed your goose and then you told something else other than gold. Your facts are really good, and I know you obviously got good sources, but you committed a sin of omission in leaving out all these factors that are the negatives of producing frac natural gas, because producing frac gas is really a negative for the people who live in the communities around it and for our water supplies, and I'm talking about our underground water supply, our aquifers, as well as our surface water.
That's a popular misconception, isn't it?
No, they have done studies now, they've done real studies now that weren't paid for by the oil and gas industry. And
They
people
died
that live
down.
in areas around and especially downstream of areas that are heavily fracked are suffering from things related to breathing methane and benzene, things like that that are in the air or drinking water that's polluted. And there have been fish kills and other animal kills in the streams that were polluted by fracked water. And that's the kind of costs that aren't being accounted for in the natural gas industry. They're just kind of being ignored, and they're getting regulations changed, so now they're calling produced water just nice stuff that they can spray on crops in California and places.
Why don't we let,
What's
is there other questions? Why don't we let
Well,
respond?
I'm
All right.
wondering, have you done any studies of the negatives of the problems with pollution and the problems with, the reason the costs are going down is because they're not having to pay to have to use water anymore to.
Well, first of all, let me point out that as an engineer, we all do optimization studies, so we have to be concerned about the pros and cons of any technology. And I could go after the batteries we haven't even talked about. What are we going to do with all the cobalt, including the cobalt in your telephone? What are we going to do with the lithium waste, that sort of thing? To your specific question about water supply, the shallowest shale oil and gas wells in the country are at about 6,000 feet. The deepest ones are at 11,000, 12,000 feet. They go through the aquifer, and yes, if you had a failure in the casing or something, you might get a leak.
That's not it. I work with oil and gas, and any casing failure is not yes, so that.
Well, let me continue. The most common source of pollution that's occurred is lack of control of the produced water before it gets reused in a, say, pad drilling type operation. If you are trying to reduce the absolute use of water, and it's a significant amount of water for a fracking job, the way to do that is to use it 7 or 8 times rather than once, and then when you get finished, to clean it up before you dispose of it in a deep well or some other acceptable location. And yes, there may have been 1 or 2 of those sorts of problems where there was leakage at the surface of this quite saline water that's produced when you finish with a frac job. Well, so is everything that comes out of the earth. I'm sorry to tell you that the car you're driving is based on low-level radiation, if you will. It
You
can
know,
go
but with the
there.
fracking, they're adding biocides to the water, because as they drill down into these long runs, they're introducing oxygen, which is causing the bacteria to grow and break down the oil. So they're introducing biocides to kill off life of the bacteria.
Yeah, but remember, we're talking about heavily saline water. I didn't finish, but the only water we drink that comes out of wells is in the first 500 to 1,000. Beyond that, it's way too salty for anybody to drink.
Right, but the casings have been gone, but they years and yet some of them they'll burst really down. If you ever see casings that have been down in an oil well, they're like just, half-inch steel, concrete crumbles.
Well, remember, oil is produced over a 25-year horizon, at least in the Deepwater Gulf. We're talking about 3 years in the shale plays. At any rate, there are pros and cons to anything we talk about here, and certainly concern and sensitivity to water usage and control is an important input. And I think the records would show that the companies that are exploiting shale plays are doing a better job than they did in 2005 or 6. You might not agree with that, but I think they are doing a little better job.
And as Katie mentioned, it is officially lunchtime now, so as long as our speakers don't mind to stick around and answer a few more questions, it looks like we still have a lot of interest, so just want to let you know.
And if you haven't signed in yet for CLE credit, then please sign in on this one.
Why don't you go ahead? And if we can try and be relatively brief, so we can get it, because there are a lot of people who want to ask questions.
Yeah, what I was missing from your presentation, Professor Smith, was also the risks and costs associated with the impact of methane on climate change. We know here we have especially from sea level rise. Sea level rise is accelerating. The latest prognosis are if we don't cut to zero carbon emission virtually now, if we go with business as usual, we'll have maybe 4 foot of sea level rise by 2100. But by 2200, like if we want to have a 500-year anniversary here, we talk about 23 feet. By 2300, we talk about a global sea level rise of 39 feet. Forget about New Orleans, forget about all of Louisiana. That is a continued business as usual. 39 feet. Globally, locally here it's even more than that because of guidance and other factors. So, what
Well,
is cost?
I would argue that your numbers are based on projections, probably from UN, which hasn't been right two years in a row so far. So, yes, they have. I'm not going to sit here and argue about global warming. I would simply say that the U.S. as an economy sort of ceases to exist if we don't have access to hydrocarbon fuels. If that's an acceptable cost, then we can go ahead and do what you suggest.
Sir?
In reality, right now, as there is legislation that qualifies facilities, the reduction of electricity, and how it can back production. So in that time period, because of what was coming down, I just asked, how many private energy electricity, solely based on water, think that's about per property, are 100% sustainable from a good without a tax on it.
So if I think repeat the question back, you're saying as more renewables come online, including from a variety of participants in the marketplace, there would be a need for reliable, consistent, available power that that particular renewable owner is not in a position to provide. I'm kind of getting to the areas of the QF example that you provide, basically saying that someone has to provide. I think this is the part what you're getting at.
They're looking at that, what they can do. And the renewable fuel sheet, they're going to
this particular issue is the emergence of regional market prices. So you have the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, of which we in the energy territories are part. It extends all the way up from here to Manitoba, across the middle of the country, are a power market with an entity that is responsible for balancing. And I guess I think it would be a problem we've not really gotten to this point to say what the 100% of renewables is. You may remember it's 15% right now. So I guess I would just note that the kind of independent system operator is foreseeing the majority of new generation coming online as being intermittent renewables, and I don't see them raising red flags about that. It's not because what you're saying is not a core component of the overall system reliability need, but we do have an enormous amount of legacy fossil fuel generation at this point, and in fact we have an overcapacity. Our capacity markets are very, very low. So I don't think that, I think that what you're asking as a question would narrow down to a single resource generator, when certainly in our context here as a member of MISO, we have access to a broader marketplace where there is system balancing that's being done. And I think I would point to, I hope that you don't see it as overly optimistic. The innovation that is occurring, not just in the technologies that we have, but how we use them going forward, so that there will be new solutions as we get closer to those upper ranges. But at 15%, I mean, if you bring that up to 25%, you're not getting those kind of problems. We still have a good ways to go before we get to there, or 50%. I think that we would have a problem if the way that once upon a time vertically integrated monopolies operated in isolation from broader regional markets. I think we would have more problem than we do when you have regional transmission organization that's responsible for ensuring overall balance and reliability of power generation. So that's my answer. I'd happily turn
Well,
to
I would first of all make sure everybody knows what a QF is. A QF is a incentive provided by PURPA in 1978 or whenever it was, that said that if I generate the power as a poor independent power producer, the local utility has to buy it. What was left unsaid was what the price should be. And the Entergys of the world have said, well, I've got to keep the gas plant sitting there anyway, so I will give you the avoided cost of the gas that I would have burned. And the local QF said, no, I want retail pricing. And that was not going to happen. They settled on sort of a wholesale price mechanism. But the easiest way for that QF facility to cover itself is to go out into the market and purchase gas, dispatchable power, marry it to its renewables, and sell the package as a dispatchable unit.
I would say
They'll have no problems with that.
The easiest is to participate in the market. They can sell their power into the market, at which point it becomes the responsibility of the system operator to make sure that the overall balance is there. I just don't think that you have the situation where a single generator, a renewable generator, or your traditional gas QF is needing to operate as a sole operator. I mean, I
if
think
somebody will buy it, that's
right. But that's what the MISO. There's clearing prices for that. You either sell it at the price you like, or you sell at the price that you're able to, or you don't sell it. But
or you go bankrupt.
That's correct. Which actually, this is really, really interesting as it relates to natural gas as well. And I guess it's really important to recognize that, first of all, I would maybe not disagree with the underlying aim, but I would dispute the point that you made about the Alliance for Affordable Energy being immediately opposed to any fossil fuel resource. That's just not the case. The construction of combined cycle gas turbine at 9 Mile Point is not something that Alliance opposed when it came up. The acquisition of Union Power in Arkansas is not something that we opposed when it came up. Now, we have some regrets in hindsight, and it has very much to do with the fact that even as a combined cycle gas turbine, the most efficient form of gas generation, it is not proving able to sell power into the market and recoup costs as it was told to us it would. So the cost that we were told would be on our monthly bill has been double and sometimes triple what we were told, because that power plant was acquired on a fire sale. It was acquired on a fire sale, which sounds good. I mean, that's good. We got it at half the cost of what it would cost to build that kind of a resource from scratch. But it was on a fire sale because it had been a merchant generator operating with the expectation of being able to sell into the market and sell a lot of power, recoup its costs, and it went bankrupt. It went bankrupt because it's not price competitive with the power available in the marketplace. So we've now acquired it on the assumption that we also would be able to sell power into the market, and that bet didn't pan out. Now, I'm not saying that we don't use it or that it doesn't fit somehow into what we're doing, but it is a cautionary tale. It is a cautionary tale that directly relates to the decision from yesterday, because there is an assumption of a rather substantial amount of market sales from this peaking power plant that is expected to then recoup costs that otherwise would be charged on our bills. So if the money is not recouped for the very same reason that the Union Power Plant bought at a fire sale, which is a more efficient unit, is able to generate, then that's that much more we have to pay on our bills. So I guess I'd just say that this is a really, really good question. I see you kind of kicked off a few different discussions in this, but the notion of how the individual decisions relate to the broader energy markets is extremely important. And ultimately, certainly in the regulated monopoly context, all of these costs are coming back and landing on our own bills.
Yeah.
I know that a few European countries, like Germany, Scandinavian countries, are approaching 100% renewable energy. So I guess, A, do they have fossil fuel backups? And B, are they breaking that contract of turning on a light switch and having no power?
The short answer is yes and no, because they never committed to it to begin with. But
Eric,
perhaps
can I just add one thing? Germany, in fact, is talking about closing its nuclear power plants. It wants to move more and more towards renewables. It's pretty far away, and the short-term effect has been using a lot more coal. And it's buying more and more electricity from nuclear plants in Alsace, in France. So their goal is there, but it's just, they're a ways off from that. We'll see if they succeed. They seem intent on it.
these
Sorry to
lights
interrupt,
that you see going in the law school here, Louisiana starts off with a major advantage. It basically runs on nukes for base load and on gas for the load following capacity. The little plant that we're disputing about, 100 megawatts or so, is designed as a peaking unit. So it's not designed to run full time. It's to run to avoid those peaks in demand in the middle of the summer or in the middle of the winter when you might lose the whole system in order to protect the grid. That's what the plant's for.
You know, I know some of the price estimates you were given on natural gas from like you said, 2016, 2015, but if you don't know this about the Haynes bill, it is, and I live on top of it and I keep up with it a lot, it is now being touted in the last year and a half internationally for the successful engineering and bringing the prices down. And you know, you heard the thing this morning about mindfulness and let's not judge good and bad. It's important for you to realize that when you made the cover of Journal of Petroleum Technology about 6 months ago, there's an international conference about the Haynes bill. And what it is the efficiency, as you well know, is from the laterals, they're doing it better, and the proppants. Now, in North Louisiana and East Texas, to that concern, it's not like Pennsylvania. They are, either they reuse or re-inject the water, so that's part of the cost cycle. But when you're doing that, what, for better or for worse, what it brings up is that the change, the rapid change of the technology of fracking as far as cost efficiency is I don't know how that figured into your December 2016, but at a price being held constant for natural gas for pretty much 11 years and a half, what's happening in the Haynesville is world news in engineering and fracking. And since we're pretty much from Louisiana, if you didn't know that, you know, you should know that. It's, because the Haynesville is at 11 to 12,000 feet, so at its time, it was one of the most expensive dry gas fracking. And so we don't have the liquids coming off of it. And if you watch
I would also add that all of that fancy $10 billion investment in Cheniere would be in trouble if it didn't have access to the
That's right.
Haynesville. So yes, it's a little more expensive source, but it's a lot closer to the
Yeah,
consumer.
but I tell you, engineering costs.
I can remember when the Haynesville break-even was over $4 an MCF. It's way below that now.
We have another,
Yeah, we can go to this big picture, just brief concept. I sort of call the gas and songs as a bridge away from coal, with the theory that the emissions that are quite combustion half CO2, and then on the other sort of came up with the whole methane, into methane issue, and it burns in, and basically got to liquid gas as about equivalent on the change of coal. Which then I think undermines the bridge concept. So the rest I want to ask you about.
Well, first thing I would point out is the Cornell study has been under some serious questioning recently. You need to go back and check. You can just Google Cornell study and see that there are a number of people who've questioned the underlying data from that study. Secondly, even if the study was correct, there have been a lot of steps taken by the industry to reduce any fugitive emissions of methane along the way. The final point I would make is it's not just an issue of fossil fuels versus renewables. There's a whole group of people in this country, starting with Maryland and New York and Illinois, who are arguing that really nuclear should be included because it's zero emissions. And the reason is nuclear costs something to produce. On a unit basis, it's not very much. But on a unit basis, as far as the solar program, it's got a zero cost, which is part of the problem in California. They have a duck curve there. It's a little different than our duck curve. Their duck curve says we're going to use solar to the max, and everybody's going to go home at 5 o'clock and turn on all of their appliances. And I've got a ramp in order of gigawatts in an hour or two, and even the gas plants can't do that. So what they're attempting to do is a mixture of batteries and gas plants, using high output batteries for a relatively short period of time to buy time for the gas plants to come on stream.
How much, in your estimation, I mean, I'm a lawyer, right, so
And I'm not. So.
I'm a lawyer who says, so in your estimation, how does gas compare to coal?
I think the chemical difference is the 2 to 1 that you read about. If everything's done properly and I burn coal as cleanly as I can, I'm still going to get twice the CO2 that I would get from natural gas.
There must be something.
Well, what you end up doing with the coal is you have to bury it or do some react it to get rid of it. Some people are experimenting with trying to create more methane from the coal waste. Yes?
Sorry.
Okay. I shouldn't have taken a little.
Nuclear, all these cost calculations only work to continue to sterilize 100% of the environmental and human costs of production. So I just wanted to make that point, and as an economist, you know that, you refer to processes, but it's really more attempting to get the industry to actually measure and account for and internalize the costs of that. I wanted to focus not reliable, and it's not affordable.
I would argue that it is reliable, but it's only used at the peak demand periods of time. That's why they call it a peaker.
But
The
to
second,
earlier discussion, there will be no market for it. Solar capacity is built really in at under 2 cents a kilowatt. So the peaker plant that I and everyone who lives in the city is going to have to spend the next 3 decades paying for, we're going to get no benefit, and much like the Arkansas one, we're going to have these stranded assets that we're going to suffer and pay for. But to be clear, I can afford the power bill. Pretty sure everybody in this room can. But we have tens of thousands of families that are desperate as we speak who can't pay the power bill now because it's so bad. This plant, which they are going to get zero benefit from, zero periods of power outages, and certainly it's you had on your slide that Entergy or the Alliance said it was going to raise power bill. No, Entergy said it's going to raise everybody's power bill.
Moving target.
Against their numbers.
Yeah. So we're not going to be able to sell that power, and it's going to be a legacy that I think is going to, in many ways, cripple the city.
well, I would make a couple of quick points, not necessarily in opposition, but I would point out New Orleans, because of its very parochial Public Service Commission outlook, has zero generation in the city. Zero. All of the power is imported from somewhere.
We don't need generation, but we don't need a peaker power plant that will use less than 80 hours a year that is 13 miles from our critical pumping station infrastructure. There's a power plant just across the river
Yes,
that,
conveniently outside of Orleans Parish.
but conveniently owned by entities.
Yes.
So they never wanted to talk
There's an
about
object
it,
lesson in that.
but of course, to their point, they wouldn't make any profit if they didn't enter agreement with Entergy Louisiana to look at building extended capacity at that plant, which is a mile from the pumping station that you saw.
The pumping stations don't use Entergy power. The pumping stations have their own generation out here near the waterworks, near the Surgeon Waterworks. That's where their power comes from, and it is all underground. So, yes, there are issues with the Public Service Commission, but the point of the matter is the system that they built was designed to be reliable. They built the generation 100 years ago. So it's a question of replacing bad generation
And
with
this
good
peaker plant
generation.
will ask me to assist that, which is why it's my money, it's our money. We should be investing our money in things that are actually critical to the city of New Orleans, not some remote possibility of a capacity allocating power failure when we have more than 7 outages a day now. That's what we should be spending.
You're arguing that they should invest in more high-cost power distribution equipment to reduce reliability. I can't disagree with that. I would just say that the impact of installing that below-grade power distribution system would dwarf the kinds of costs that you're talking about.
That's the only option that's been raised. Entergy never once presented alternate options for transmission and distribution. Burying the power lines is not the only option. There are plenty of examples all across the country for different kinds of investments in microgrid and battery technology. There were other options that they were never even presented.
Well, Entergy has certainly presented and installed additional transmission capacity. They're currently doing it in the southwest part because that's where we're spending $114 billion on new plants. And most of the power consumption in Louisiana is not by you and I, it's by the industry that provides the jobs to Louisiana, 80% or so. So just keep that in mind. There are pros and cons to anything we do. You voted for the city council. Presumably your ancestors voted for New Orleans being its own monitor. If I were out to save money for the ratepayers of New Orleans, the first thing I would do is incorporate and consolidate New Orleans into the Louisiana, Entergy Louisiana, not have a separate regulatory regime that costs the city about $10 million a year and costs Entergy at least the same amount. So you want to save money, you can save $20 million a year pretty quickly. Just vote for the right people the next time around.
Power bills, particularly for our low income folks, and none of what you're talking about can do anything except commit us to higher bills.
We can argue offline about whether or not we're doing anything. Moreover, you can talk to the Entergy people about that as well. What they would say is that we are improving the reliability of the system, absent the distribution scheme. We are also going to have negligible, if any, effect on the water subsidence debates. And to the degree that NISHU already has the wires in place and the gas supply in place, the cheapest thing they can do is to use these reciprocating turbines, which in turn are a response to the city council saying they didn't want another gas turbine, which is what the Patterson site was originally, just like what they're trying to build now.
Thank you.
Okay.
There's a lot of great data on the natural gas scenario. In my line of work, I don't see those projections.
Well, you're welcome to.
I think we should, yeah, well, maybe one more, if you can make it brief, because people want to
I just wanted to add a couple footnotes. The whole concept of natural gas as a bridge fuel, much less a game changer, was created as an advertising narrative by the American Natural Gas Alliance in 1988 to head off James Hansen's climate change testimony from the U.S. Congress. So they decided to get way ahead of the curve on trying to battle what they knew would be growing opposition to fossil fuel generation in general. So they've continued to expedite and made environmental groups sadly that picked up on the same narrative, natural gas as a clean energy alternative, as a bridge fuel to the future. It's a bridge fuel to a third carbon era, which is what the Trump administration is clearly taking us into. It's been no discussion here about policy, what's happening right now. They're taking away communities' ability to fight plants, whatever the energy source. So we're seeing a fracturing of our democracy, a fracturing of our ecosystems, and a fracturing of our public health, which also was not discussed, unfortunately, there. Second thing about methane is that it is 50 times, 25 to 85 times, 50 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So indeed, it's not just the Cornell study. If you look at the 2-year life cycle impacts, natural gas is as bad, if not worse, than coal, much less oil. Those are facts.
I would dispute whether they're facts or certainly strongly held opinions, but I would argue
No, they're facts.
I can go run an experiment across the street in the lab and show you that we produce less CO2 emissions and that we can keep things sealed up pretty well in terms of methane emissions. That's why we have flare stacks at all the refineries and all the petrochemical plants, so that we don't emit lots of methane into the
It's still a
atmosphere.
greenhouse gas. It still keeps us tethered to the fossil fuel treadmill. That's where the bridge fuel concept comes from. These fuels.
Well, if you have a better idea, my point earlier is we can't imagine an economy for the United States that doesn't depend on oil and gas. Yes, we could do without some exports, perhaps, but one of the ways to think about those LNG exports is it's allowing the rest of the world to get rid of coal-fired power plants. So to the degree that we produce natural gas in excess of our domestic needs and North American needs, it's really supporting a reduction, just as we've seen in the United States, in CO2 emissions. And if you
Not
can,
the word carry and Donald Trump wanted to.
well, I'm not arguing politics.
I think we probably ought to break
We're done,
for
yeah.
lunch, but thank you. Everybody's leaving friends.
That's right, we didn't hit anybody.